Hello, 7th grade. I want to give you a little background to Sefer Melachim, the Book of Kings, which is the book that you will learn about next year in Tanakh. Now, we had just learned how the Am has asked for a Melech, a king, and Hashem thinks it's a horrible idea. He warns them, he tells Shmuel to warn them, and the nation ignores him, and Hashem says, Shema b'kol ha'am, listen to the voice of the people. If they want a melech, let them have a melech. And the people say that we want a melech to fight our battles, and we want to be kechol hagoyim, like all other nations. But Hashem, even though He's allowing them to have a melech, He places upon the melech 3 limits. 1, they cannot amass silver and gold. 2, they cannot have many horses. The idea of not having a lot of gold and silver is so that he's not just enriching himself. And many horses, it's the same sort of idea. But many horses maybe also involves having excessively large armies, which involves a large burden on the economy and the people and taxes. And also, he cannot have many wives. Now, the idea of not having many wives is, one, about having the time to serve his people, but also these kinds of large families with many wives are necessarily going to have much turmoil. And this family turmoil, we'll see when these kings ignore these rules, will cause trouble for the whole nation, and even a couple civil wars, where those who feel ignored will attack their own father and try to seize the throne of their fathers while their fathers are still alive. Now, the first king who is elected is Shaul HaMelech. Please write that down. Shin Aleph Vav Lamed. Now, Shaul was known to be an Anav, a very humble man, and he starts off very humbly. The first time we hear about him, he is tending to his donkeys, and the idea is to show that he was a very humble man. And when Shmuel tells him and he anoints him as the king, we see that he's shocked. And at this point, he's a very humble man. But we will see he will eventually get intoxicated with his position of power. And soon he will think that he can do whatever he wants and anything he wants. Now, his first sin, make sure to take notes on this, is that Shmuel tells Shaul, only go to war after I offer a sacrifice and after I have arrived. This is the Devar Hashem. These are the words of God. And Shaul ignores this one day when Shmuel comes a little bit late, and he offers the sacrifice without Shmuel, without any assistance from Kohanim, and he goes to war on his own. Now, it was a sin because a king is not allowed to offer a sacrifice, only the Kohanim. And he went against a direct order of Hashem. Again, the idea is now he thinks he can do whatever and anything he wants. Now, his second sin has to do with the command of Hashem to kill Amalek. Now, at this point, I don't want to go into the whole ethical issue of killing a whole nation. There's a lot to be saying about this, but basically the idea is that Amalek was always an enemy of the Jewish people. And from the second that we left Egypt, they were constantly harassing us. The issue was not only attacking us, but the way in which they attacked us. Now, when we had left Egypt, they would attack from the rear and attack the weak and the old and the sick. And this is how they also harassed the Jewish people once we arrived in Israel. Now, so Hashem had said, kill all of Amalek, and Shaul, he doesn't choose to spare the kids or the quote-unquote innocent. Who does he spare? The best of the cattle and the sheep. And he just takes it for himself. He kills all of the rest of the cattle and sheep, but he takes the best of them for himself. And Hashem had said that that wasn't allowed. Yet he does this. And he also spares Agag HaMelech, Agag, who was the king of Amalek. Again, it's not about any sort of ethical qualms that he may have had. He chooses to just spare the king. And the reason is he wanted to parade him around like a trophy. There was this ancient practice in the ancient world: when you took over a nation, you spared the king or the greatest noblemen and warriors, and you paraded them around like a trophy. So for these sins, Shaul is told that he will die, and that his sons will not be kings, even though initially this was promised. So Shaul, in the middle of a battle, he's cut off from the rest of his army. He's on a mountaintop, and he knows that he will be killed because his enemies are all around him. He takes out his sword, and he falls upon his own sword. Now, so Shaul dies, and the next king who is elected is David HaMelech. Okay, David, Dalet, Vav, Dalet. Now, David HaMelech, he again started off very righteous. He was known as a great warrior. He kills a giant with a single stone and a little slingshot. And as a king, he wins many wars, and he secures the borders, and he conquers God's chosen capital of Yerushalayim. That's another accomplishment. He conquers the capital. And then he also brings the Aron Hashem, the Ark of Hashem, to Yerushalayim. And another great accomplishment is that he makes the city of Yerushalayim more strong. He fortifies it, and he does the same thing with many other cities, making Israel a much safer place. So again, he starts off good, but then problems start happening when he ignores these specific halachot to a king. So David has many wives, and one day he sees a woman bathing on a roof. He looks at her, he likes her, he finds out that her husband is Uriah, who serves in his armies. He asks an officer to have Uriah serve on the front lines, and then he tells these officers, when Uriah is serving on the front lines, I want you to abandon him in the middle of a battle. And so he doesn't physically kill him, but essentially he does. And then he marries Uriah's wife. Now, Hashem knows about this, so he sends a prophet, Natan Hanavi, saying, I know how you had Uriah killed and why you did it, and therefore Hashem has said that you will have these three punishments. One is that there will always be a sword on your house, meaning that David will always have a kingdom where there is war. Another punishment is that one of his children will die at a young age. And another punishment is that someone will sleep with many of David HaMelech's wives, and this will be known to all. It was supposed to be a public shame to David HaMelech for this sin that David had done in secret. Now, again, so another sin of David HaMelech was not only this murder of Uriah, but also having many wives. So, I mean, overall, David HaMelech's reign was good, but he did also have some serious issues. Now, the next king is Shlomo HaMelech. Shin Lamed Memhe. Now, his name means peace, and he would finally bring peace to the nation for his great skills as a statesman and a warrior. He would be greatly feared because of how wise he was. He became so wise because Hashem said, I will give you any wish because of how well you have served me. And what Shlomo asked for is Chachma, wisdom. And so throughout the world, Shlomo is known for his great wisdom. And a great accomplishment of his was that initially he was enriching his people greatly by making the economy thrive, allowing for very productive trade to occur. He further consolidates the empire, expands it, and secures the borders, and finally achieves peace. And like David HaMelech, he also enlarges the major cities. And another great accomplishment of Shlomo HaMelech was that he would be allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, in order to house the Aron Hashem. Now again, like the two previous kings, he starts off doing everything well, but then he runs into a couple problems that were mainly caused by the fact that he would have hundreds of wives. Now, under the influence of these wives, he would have many issues that were caused by their influence, meaning that many of these wives were non-Jews and they were still loyal to their parents' faith, and many of them still worship idols. And under their influence, Shlomo HaMelech would eventually start also worshiping idols. These wives first asked him to not only build the Beit HaMikdash, they asked him to build altars to their idols, and he does it. And specifically, the foreign gods of Baal, who is a male god, a famous male god of the Middle East, and also the Asherah, a famous female goddess who was very popular at this time in the Middle East. So first he was just building them for his wives, and eventually he himself starts worshiping Baal and the Asherah. And so also all these altars and all these things that his wives ask of him comes at a great cost. So he has to overtax and burden his people, and this will cause serious issues with the economy, and the people become very angry about this. Now I want you to go a little bit back. I was talking about having many wives causing issues, and I asked how the fact that David HaMelech ignored this rule of not having many wives, how this led to many issues. Several of David HaMelech's sons would try to seize power while David was still alive. One of these sons was Avshalom. Also known in English as Absalom. Now, he was exiled from the kingdom. And the reason is because he had killed Amnon, who was the half-brother who had raped his sister, and Absalom was so angry about this that he kills Amnon. Now, of course, it wasn't okay what Amnon had done, but Absalom was not supposed to take matters into his own hands. There is a legal process. So Absalom has to be exiled, and also Absalom, he knew that he could not stay. He knew that if he stayed around, that there would be serious consequences. So eventually David lets him come back, and soon after, Absalom starts to act as though he is the king, and starts gathering for himself an army. And eventually there is a actual civil war. Avshalom is killed, and then soon after there's also another similar incident with another son of David HaMelech, a son named Adoniah. He started parading himself around as though he is a king. David tried to ignore it, and eventually he can no longer ignore it. It's obvious that he's going to seize the throne. And David HaMelech crushes the army of Adoniah. So we see a pattern where these kings start off good, and then because they ignore, or partly caused by the fact that they ignore these rules specific to a king, many problems happen. Now next year you will learn about many of the kings, and you will see this pattern. The kings start off good, then they move to excess, and they do sin after sin, and this pattern will eventually lead to a serious civil war where the nation splits up into a kingdom in the south called Yehudah, and a kingdom in the north called Yisrael. And now in its weakened state of being two nations, eventually they will all be exiled. And that is the first exile. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it.